Good evening. We're live from Westminster, where we change. We're hoping to do extended interviews with all the contenders. Tonight, we're joined by Nandy. Good evening.
Good evening.
What have you done in your political career that qualifies you to be a potential Prime Minister?
I've fought many battles before I was in Parliament and since, including taking on the last Labour government about getting child refugees out of Yarlswood Immigration Detention Centre, including battling my own party over issues like free schools when we supported them, because I could see the damage that it was doing to children, particularly children with special educational needs. But most of all, I suppose what I've done is I've built and empowered good teams of people in order to make change possible. And I believe that no one person is good enough to be Prime Minister and to change this country. What it takes is a team and a movement, and we haven't seen the like of that in the Labour Party for 20 years. That's what I want to do.
But to be Prime Minister, you have to be ready for the big league and to deal with bigger issues than the ones you've just mentioned. For example, the year started with the US killing the leader of Iran's Al-Quds forces. The prospect of a major regional conflict loomed. What is it in your CV that would reassure voters that you have the knowledge and the expertise to deal with an international crisis?
Well, I suppose because I have the humility to know that no one individual can deal with an international crisis, and you only have to look at the isolationist approach that people like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson seem to be pursuing to see the consequences. I believe in the rule of law. I believe in the rule of international law. I believe in rebuilding those international institutions and forging those deep and broad alliances across the world in order to make the world a safer place.
But you don't have knowledge and experience of international affairs.
I've been in Parliament for 10 years, and during that time I've had to make a series of decisions about going to war, airstrikes, about climate change, about the refugee crisis. I worked with child refugees before I came into Parliament. I'm not claiming for a moment to be a greater expert than somebody who spent the last 20 years working in foreign affairs, but nor do I believe that that is the job of the Prime Minister, to think that they, as one individual, have all the answers.
No, but they need to give leadership. And you claim that you're the brave choice, your words, in this leadership contest. What does that mean?
Well, it means that we are at a moment in the Labour Party where we've been losing elections now for 15 years, and we are shattered. After the defeat that we had, many of us, me included, saw it coming. We were warning about it for some time, but the scale of it and the reality of it was brutal.
So why are you the brave choice?
Because at this moment in time, I think a lot of people, understandably, in the Labour Party and in the Labour movement feel bruised. They feel that they need to retreat to a safe choice. We need to steady the ship. And the reason that I said what you played on your introduction, that if we do not up our game, if we do not change course, we will die and will deserve to, is because we've been getting it wrong for 15 years. We can't keep changing the man at the top and thinking that somehow that will solve our problems. There is a bigger agenda, and that's the agenda that I'm setting out today.
I still don't understand why that makes you the brave choice, but if you are the brave choice, who would be the safe choice? Rebecca Long-Bailey?
Well, look, I don't look like or sound like any Labour leader we've ever had or any Prime Minister. But
neither does Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Sure, but if you look at the people who are making waves around the world, in fact, like myself, Rebecca Long-Bailey, they are largely people who are younger women who are going out and inspiring people around the country.
So she would be a brave choice too.
Well, that is the task of the next Labour leader, and whether that's me or anybody else on the ballot paper, the point that I'm making is that if Labour retreats into the safe space of just simply doing what we've been doing for 15 years, we will not succeed.
Right.
The next Labour leader on the 4th of April will find the TV cameras immediately that result is announced, as you well know, Andrew, turning and facing the other way. Boris Johnson has a huge majority, and we're going to have to go out and make waves in the country. We're going to have to reconnect with people, and we're going to have to show a different sort of leadership, and that takes a different sort of leader.
But after election defeats, everybody who runs for their party's leadership says a version of that. I've heard it before, and you talk a lot in generalities. I mean, you say Labour needs, quote, a real fundamental change. You promise to be, quote, a different leader, the brave choice. What does any of that mean?
Well, you started with a maxim, know your enemy. And one of the things that I think the Tories are absolutely getting right, that we need to take really seriously, is the clamour out there in the country, in many parts of the country that have seen decades of economic decline, for more investment, for more attention and for more respect. And the announcement this week, it may be symbolic, but that the Tories are doing what I suggested a month ago and moving their headquarters out of London, that will go down well in many of those previously red wall seats.
But everybody running for this position is saying that you need to do more for Labour areas. That doesn't differentiate you.
But let me tell you where they're getting it wrong. Because when Sajid Javid and Boris Johnson stand up in the budget and say we're going to put huge amounts of money into infrastructure projects around the North, the Midlands, Scotland, North Wales, what they will be doing is a continuation of the model that has failed for a very long time. The clamour out there in the country is not for more of the paternalism from Westminster and Whitehall, a group of men sitting behind desks dictating that they know best about what we need in other parts of the country. What people really want is power. And there is nothing on the Tories' agenda about that at all. And that is what I would give them, not as the Labour leader, but as the next Labour Prime Minister.
I'll come on to this because, again, people who are running for parties always talk about, we'll devolve power. They seem to forget it when they get into power, however. Brave leaders, I would suggest, tell their parties things they don't want to hear. What are you telling Labour it doesn't want to hear?
Well, I think our members actually are fairly open-minded, if I'm honest, but I have talked about the things we got wrong as the things that we got right. Over the last 3 years...
But what are you telling them that they don't want to hear?
Over the last 3 years, I have been trying to broker a compromise on Brexit that would avoid us ending up in the position we are now with a huge Tory majority and a hard Brexit. And that was something that the party leadership didn't want to hear. It was also something that a lot of my constituents didn't want to hear. But I think, in all honesty, that I was undeniably right about that. Well, and today I stood up at the RSA and I talked about internationalism. I talked about where Labour was getting it right, but I also talked about where Labour was getting it wrong, particularly in relation to how we'd handled Russia and the decision to side with the Russian government over the Russian people.
But let's come on to this Brexit business here, because you say what your position was, but you voted against Theresa May's deal 3 times. Now you're complaining that the Johnson approach is the hardest of hard Brexits. But that's because you're to blame. You voted against the May deal. You could have had it. You made a strategic misjudgment.
But come on, you know better than most commentators, because you do actually pay attention to some of this stuff, that deal that Theresa May put before Parliament wasn't a trade deal. She brought a withdrawal agreement 3 times that offered no clue or direction as to... No, hold on.
But trade is what we now discuss. This was a withdrawal agreement.
No, you asked me a question. You said you wanted some detail. I'm about to give you the detail. You know as well as I do that what Theresa May put before Parliament 3 times was a withdrawal agreement that would take us out of the EU with no clue about where we were going next and no role for Parliament in it. Were we going to be in a customs union? Were we going to negotiate access to the single market? There was absolutely no direction of travel. When I said I would vote for Theresa May's deal was when she finally did what I and others had been asking for months. She said she would bring a bill to Parliament that would enable Parliament to set the terms of that negotiation. I said I would vote for it. She resigned. The bill was pulled and I voted for it the next time it came before Parliament, which was when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister.
So I'm not quite sure now. Is the Johnson deal better or worse than the May deal?
Well, now it's irrelevant what Labour thinks about the Johnson deal because, quite frankly, he has a majority and we don't have the means to decide.
Yeah, but in your view, since you voted against the May deal 3 times, then you said the May deal should be revived. I mean, many people thought you were all over the place on this.
Well, pay attention is all I'm asking people to do.
Well, I am paying attention. I mean, you actually flirted with voting for the May deal after having voted against it 3 times.
I didn't flirt with voting for the May deal. I told...
Reviving the May deal, you told Sky News on October the 6th, was the only way to avoid no-deal Brexit, having opposed it 3 times.
There wasn't a single thing about my position that changed during that time. In January, Theresa May finally agreed to negotiate with Labour. I told her at the time that if she brought a bill before Parliament that gave a role for Parliament in the next stages of the negotiations, I would vote for it. I was consistent in that all the way through. And had she brought that bill, I told her and I told my constituents that I would vote for it. And when Boris Johnson finally did, I voted for it. Not because I believed it was perfect, not in any sense, but because it gave us a chance to get the things that we needed to get into that bill: a customs union, access to a single market and protection for
Well, I
our
want to come on
constituents.
to that, because you want to build a so-called red bridge between pro-Remain Labour areas and Labour's pro-Leave heartlands, many of which are now Tory. What possible approach to the EU could unite Hampstead and Hull?
I think opposition to a hard Brexit and a better vision of where Britain sits in the world. One of the things that I set out today was the lack of thinking that we've done on the left about what a commitment to internationalism now means. Let me give you an example of this.
But I'm talking about the EU and how you would approach and unite Hampstead and Hull. I want to concentrate on what your attitude to the EU could be that would unite these two areas.
Could I just gently say to you that if you don't want me to talk in generalities, you are going to have to give me time to answer the question. And that will take more than one sentence, because reuniting Hampstead and Hull that have been moving apart for 40 years
exactly.
takes
And I'm
more than a
asking you what would bring them together.
And what would bring them together is for somebody in British politics to genuinely seek the common ground that unites those two places. Let me give you an example. On climate change, often we find people in one part of Labour's coalition calling for a green revolution, and in another part of Labour's coalition who are seeing power stations close, who are fearing that their jobs are going to be lost, feeling that this is something that is somehow threatening. But actually, if you think about what a green revolution means, it means investment in clean energy jobs that should be in the UK, it means investment in home insulation that will cut energy bills, and it means the better buses that, frankly, I've been talking about for decades.
That may unite them in terms of green policy. I don't know, but it might. I'm asking you about what unites them in their attitude to Europe. Today in your speech, you also said you wanted free movement to continue, free movement of people, which would suggest that your idea of listening is to tell the people of Hull that they were wrong and they should suck up the immigration policy of Hampstead.
I think that's based on your idea of what the people of Hull are like, and I don't recognise that reality.
Well, they voted against free movement.
I live in Wigan, have lived there for a decade. These are my friends, my neighbours, my family and my constituents, not just voters.
And they voted against free movement.
And let me tell you why. Because for too long, too many people have felt, not just in Britain, but across the EU, that free movement favours the skilled and the mobile at the expense of governments investing in the skills of young people in towns like mine. And if free movement were to be... Nobody in Wigan resents the fact that we have people coming from across the EU to take care of people in our local hospital and our care homes. But they do resent the fact that those skilled jobs aren't available to them as well. And at a time when we were having the referendum, there was a young person who said to me, I don't mind the fact that you're telling me that there are lots of nurses in the hospital, but you've just cut the nursing bursary and I don't have a chance. Free movement married with real investment in skills for young people.
And you think that will build the red bridge? You're going to tell the people who voted for Brexit in 2016, who voted in this Conservative government in December, that you'll continue with free movement, but you're going to improve skills policy. That's what you're going to say?
Well, yes, I do believe that
would have allayed... I
do believe that would have allayed concerns, but with respect, Andrew, you're fighting battles that have now gone. The task facing the Labour Party is far bigger than this now. We're leaving the EU. Boris Johnson has a majority. When I say that Labour must raise our game, one of the slogans that you don't seem to like, the reason that I say that is because the task now is to think about where are these alliances internationally within and outside the EU that we're going to have to build as a nation in order to keep us safe and to give our young people a chance.
Right. It's not raising your game is not something I like or dislike. That's not my job. What I'm trying to do is to find out what these phrases that you deploy mean.
Well, you could let me answer the question.
Let's come down into some detail here. What policies would you drop from the 29 Labour manifesto?
I think this is a question of rediscovering, as Nye Bevan said, the language of priorities. Most of the policies in that manifesto I thought were reasonably popular, but taken together, I think we'd vastly underestimated the need that people feel, particularly in constituencies like mine, for security. So, for example, there was a pledge on free broadband. It was a good policy. It wasn't very well explained, but it was a very good policy. But I think it was very difficult for us to go out and articulate to people that we were going to give them free broadband when the buses that they've been asking for 40 years just simply weren't there. I think there was a need to demonstrate where we were going to get the money from for the Pledge to the Waspy Women, a campaign that I very much support, and a group of women who I've been privileged to work with for a long time.
So you agreed with the pledge?
Well, but when we couldn't demonstrate where the money was coming from, that frightened people.
So you talk a lot about devolving power, listening, letting communities decide and so on. But how different would you allow them to be? If an area of the country said it wanted more selective schools, would you allow that?
Well, I think selective schools are really damaging because
No, but if a community wanted it and you've devolved power to it, would you allow it?
I think we have to think quite broadly about how we devolve power and what decisions we allow people to make.
You want to devolve power in ways that will come up with ideas you approve of.
Well, let me answer the question on selective schools, because I think this is a really...
I'm not arguing the plus and minus of selective schools. What I'm saying is if a community wanted to have them, would you allow them?
Let me answer the question.
That is the question.
Yeah, and I'm going to answer it if you'll stop talking for just one moment.
Well, get on with it
Because
then.
I think selective schools are a really good example of where actually by handing more power to a local area, you're actually disempowering a lot of the people in it. Because for those children who don't get into selective school, that writes them off, usually at the age of 11, and the consequences of that can last forever.
All right.
The agenda,
so you wouldn't allow a community to do that?
The agenda that I want to pursue is one in which we hand real power to people, not disempower them.
But not if they want selective schools. Let me ask you another idea.
That is the lesson. That is the lesson from the Tories' devolution agenda.
The issue is not whether these policies are right or wrong that the community is going for. It's whether you're prepared to devolve power to let them make their own mistakes. For example, supposing a community says, we don't want any more wind turbines in our beautiful area. Indeed, we want the existing ones taken down. Would you allow that? Well,
let me say this first of all. You said the issue is whether or not they want selective schools. I say to you that the issue is, do these policies genuinely empower people in local communities? And that, I think, is the difference between where Labour needs to be and the Tories. But let me say this to you as well, is that one of the policies that we had when I was Shadow Secretary of State for Energy was around things like issues of planning and consent for new energy projects. And we said that the local community had to have the right to decide, because one of the things that enabled local communities to do, for example, was to say to those energy companies, OK, we'll have those wind turbines, but in return, here's some of the investment we want in the area. That is an example of giving genuine power to communities.
All right, let's move on to some quick-fire policies. Bonus points if you can answer quickly, particularly yes or no. Would you abolish university tuition fees?
Yes, I would, but in the language of priorities, where I would start is restoring the education maintenance allowance and university grants.
Would you renationalise Royal Mail?
Yes.
Or would you scrap or renew Trident?
I would renew Trident if it was coupled with a strong commitment to multilateral disarmament.
You voted to scrap it in July 2016.
Because it wasn't coupled with a strong commitment to multilateral disarmament. And in fact, I came on your show at the time and explained that.
Would you accept that the NHS should use some private medical facilities, if it's free at the point of use and of high quality, to expand its capacity?
I think there's always been an element of the NHS using private providers. You know, if you're hiring a private service to provide hospital beds, for example, I think most people accept that that's not
operations?
Very damaging. I think we get into real trouble once we start going down the privatisation route in the NHS.
But is that privatisation? It's still the NHS that's
No, I have
for
to be
it.
honest with you, I'm very opposed to it, because it puts profit before people, and the implications of that are incredibly damaging.
What should the top rate of tax be?
I think top rate of tax probably should be at a level that enables people to have a dignified life. But what
number would that be?
But what I would say to you is this, is that we talk a lot about taxing earned wealth. I would like to get into a discussion about other forms of taxation, taxing unearned wealth, and not just how much we tax and how much we spend, but what we tax and what we spend on. So, for example, I would put much higher taxes on polluters, because it cannot be right that we tax income more than we tax people who are destroying our environment.
It's hard to see a route back for your party without a revival in Scotland. You've proposed setting up an international commission to look for historical examples of how nationalism has been beaten by social justice. What are you talking about?
You sound really confused by this.
I am.
I'm surprised, because you surely must have been watching as socialists have been beaten over and over again by nationalists. And the idea that we have all the answers in the Labour Party, I'm sorry, there isn't a single person who believes that. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that rather than turn inwards and argue about resources, we should look outwards to other countries and other parts of the world where they've had to deal with divisive nationalism and seek to discover the lessons from when, in those brief moments in history, in places like Catalonia and Quebec, we have managed to go and beat narrow, divisive nationalism
but the
with
Scottish
a social
nationalists
justice
will tell
agenda.
you that they believe their kind of nationalism, which isn't a hard right nationalism, their kind of nationalism goes hand in hand with social justice.
Well, I think it suits the Scottish nationalists, actually, to keep this argument going about independence, because while the entire conversation in Scotland is focused on the Constitution, nobody's paying attention to their record, which is frankly appalling.
Would you oppose or support another referendum on independence?
No, I don't support another referendum on independence. And I think I've been fairly consistent about that, whether it's Brexit or the Scottish independence referendum. I think once you ask people to decide and they make a decision, the job then is to pull together. And frankly, to be honest, I think this country has had enough of referendums.
OK, even if the SNP won a majority in Holyrood in 2021?
No, I think the job actually now is to pull together as a nation and start dealing with the challenges we face. And under this Tory government, my God, there are going to be lots.
You sound like the Prime Minister on that issue now. Anti-Semitism, your party's been rocked by it, being investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission over institutional anti-Semitism. The verdict may well come out during the leadership contest. Will you commit as leader to implementing whatever the Commission recommends?
Yes.
So when it comes to someone like Rachel Cousins, a prominent online Labour activist who's tweeted calling the Board of Deputies of British Jews Conservative backers and demanding that they disassociate themselves from that party and that they condemn all Israeli military atrocities in the West Bank, her words, is that anti-Semitic?
Yes. It is. And we have a clear policy in the Labour Party that when anti-Semitism is alleged, or particularly where you've got clear examples of that in writing, we suspend and then we investigate.
So you would suspend her from the party?
I would suspend her from the party, but moreover, we have to have a consistent policy on this. And you might remember that back in 2016, when I was in the Shadow Cabinet, I was on your programme, on the Daily Politics as it was then, around the time when a Labour MP had been involved in anti-Semitism.
Indeed.
And it was the only time that I broke ranks with the Shadow Cabinet and spoke out about it, because not to do so would have made me complicit.
We're running out of time. Just one more question here. Labour has never elected a woman as a leader. It now has a choice of 4 women and 1 man. How sexist will your party be if it chooses the 1 man?
Well, it's up to the members to decide. It's my job to go out and make the case that I don't just want to be the next leader of the Labour Party, I want to be the next Labour Prime Minister, and that means we have to make the brave choice, not play it safe, and I hope that they choose me.
We've ended where we started. Lisa, Nandy, thank you.